This planter box is a great addition to a porch or patio. Its classic design, complete with subtle curves, can be color coordinated to your home. You can size it to fit your needs, so it can hold a simple arrangement of flowers, even a small tree. Best of all, the materials should cost you less than $50.
Hey, it's Brad with another great weekend project to spend a few hours in the workshop on. This isn't really complicated, but it has a couple of challenges inside that will give you a real sense of satisfaction once you get it done. So let's go ahead and get started. Take a look at the materials we'll be using.
As usual on an outdoor project like this, I'll be using pressure-treated southern pine for the legs, rails, and bottom. Since it'll likely be sitting outside in the weather, this will give the planter more resistance to insect attack, fungus, and decay. We'll also use a half sheet of T111 exterior grade plywood for the sides. You'll need some paint or stain to suit your tastes, some deck screws, 4-inch L brackets along with carriage bolts and nuts, and finally, some weather-resistant glue and finish nails.
The planter is made up of two basic building blocks, the side and the leg. Obviously, there are 4 of each of these and they're all connected together. We'll start by making the legs.
Rough cut them at 28 inches long from a length of 4x4. This will give you some wiggle room when you're cutting the decorative pyramid tops. To create them, I set the table saw blade at a 45-degree angle. Measure and mark a spot on the table surface where the leg will cut through the center point of the 4x4 leg. Make 4 passes, turning the leg each time. Finally, cut the finished leg to 27 inches. I also like to use a small roundover bit on the edges. It cuts down on the chances of large splinters down the road and gives the legs a more finished look.
All right, once you get all 4 legs cut, go ahead and prime and paint them. Here's a tip: if you have any imperfections in the wood, sometimes 4x4s will tend to crack or split, go ahead and fill that up with an exterior grade caulk and then prime and paint them, and you'll never see it. All right, let's move on to the sides. 4 of these, obviously. Each one is identical, and at the heart of each one is this piece of T111. It's an exterior grade plywood. This is 5/8 inch thick, 21 inches across, 22 tall. Here's the thing. You should be able to get 4 of these out of a half a sheet of plywood. Make sure you have a groove running down the center. In other words, cut them so it's symmetrical. If you don't get into that sort of thing, don't sweat it, but you'll still be able to get 4 pieces out of a half a sheet. Once they're cut, go ahead and prime or seal them.
The trim on each side is made up of 2 lower rails, 2 upper rails, and a cap.
The bottom rails are 21-inch long pieces of 1x4. Obviously, you'll need 2 for each side, 1 for the inner, 1 for the outer. Once you've got all these cut, use a roundover bit to soften the top edge of the outside rail. Once they're all rounded over, just go ahead, prime and paint them. Don't forget to make sure you prime those ends. That's a primary source of water infiltration. All right, our first real challenge of the project comes from bending these 1x4s. A lot of forearm strength along the top. Let's make it easier. Just kidding. Let's use some 1x6. Now what this will do is allow us a little extra real estate to create a nice curve. Now the degree of the curve is up to you. The plans call for 120 degrees. I say you can fudge that a little bit. Lots of ways to make a curve. Easiest way is just to take a piece of flexible molding and bend it along that board, then trace it out, and you've got yourself a nice curve. Any way you like it. Now the more important thing here is, since we're going to be making 8 of these pieces, that's a lot of curves to draw out. So let's make a pattern. And we're going to use a piece of this tempered MDF to make the pattern. The reason is this is has a nice hard edge to it. So when we get to the router table, that bearing won't eat into it and possibly warp some of the pieces. Here is the pattern I've cut out. Very simple to do. We just screw it to each of the 1x6 blanks and then route away right over here.
The flush cut bit will ride along the MDF pattern and create a perfect copy on the pine. Again, the roundover bit used along the bottom edge of the top rail gives it a more finished look.
All right, now that all of our upper and lower rails have been cut, softened, primed, and painted, it's time to start assembling this thing. First thing we're going to do is take our inside upper rail and fit it up there. We want to put this on first because we're going to use this as a guide, again over on our flush cut bit, to trim off this little piece of T111 that's kind of hanging up here. I'm also going to use screws on this step because I want this piece to stay firmly in place. It's very important to make sure this stays firmly in place while we're using that router.
Once all the tops have been trimmed, install the inside lower rail using glue and finish nails or a nail gun. Now attach the outside upper and lower rails, aligning them with the edges of the sides.
Okay, at this point you should have 4 sides that look just like this. How do we get them to go from there to here? We add our top cap, and you'll notice that top cap does follow the contour. This is the step where we really do bend wood, and here's how.
Cut 4 lengths of 1x4 to 22 inches. Wet the wood and let it sit out for about 20 minutes. You'll notice it gets a little more flexible. Use a pipe clamp to draw the cap into the curve of the top. Go very slowly to avoid cracking the wood. Drill pilot holes and install exterior grade fasteners designed for use in pressure treated wood. They should be at least 1.5 inches long. After installing a couple of screws, you may want to move the clamp over to really tighten up any stubborn spots. Then use the roundover bit to smooth the outside edge. Once the wood is dried, you can prime it.
Okay, now that you have all the top caps on, I've just gone ahead and put a quick primer coat on these. Here's how we're going to attach everything together. We'll go inside the box here. You'll need 8 of these 4-inch angle brackets. We're going to drill through the upper and lower rails and then use carriage bolts for a nice finished look on the outside.
To install them, align the bracket with the outside edge of the lower rail at its center line. Mark and drill 1/4-inch holes. For the upper rails, measure up from the bottom corner to about 1.5 inches. Again, mark and drill holes for the carriage bolts.
Okay, you should have 2 sides with brackets, 2 sides without brackets. Now let's join them up. I'm just going to put one corner together here so you can see what's happening. We'll leave this open so you can see what's going on. Use clamps to really pull those brackets up tight to the piece next to it. Leave enough space, obviously, so that you can get your pencil in there to mark the holes. And be sure that the sides are perpendicular to each other, because we need to have a nice square corner here for our 4x4 legs. All right, we got our sides propped up on a couple of scraps of 2x4. That's going to give us the clearance underneath that bottom rail, so our leg sits on the ground and the rest of the planter is kind of raised. Now inside, here's how we're going to attach the legs. We're going to go through our upper and lower rails. We're going to toenail with 2.5-inch deck screws right into those legs, and that's going to give us the support we need to hold this planter up. By the way, this thing gets kind of heavy when you get it all put together, so you need somebody else around to help you move it around.
Start the bit straight into the wood, and once it catches, slowly turn the drill on an angle and continue drilling the pilot hole.
If you're going to fill this up with dirt, I'd recommend cutting a solid bottom, putting it inside on the lower rails inside. Otherwise, if you're just going to set a big pot in here, a few scraps of 1x6 across the bottom will be fine, and that will allow any excess water to drain out. Either way, you're going to have a great looking project for years to come. Thanks for joining me. See you next time.